Let's have a look at ControlNet for ComfyUI. It is a lot easier than you might think, and it is very, very useful. To follow my workshop, you can download my workflow on OpenArt. You see here there's a download button, and above that you have a green button that says Launch Workflow, where you can actually run my workflow in the cloud for free. Here we have a workflow that's just a simple text-to-image workflow, even though it looks a little bit more complicated. So as always, we have our checkpoint loader. We have the positive and the negative prompt over here. Then we have here our case sampler. We have the VAE loader. We have the VAE decoder. And down here, we are rendering the output image. Of course, in this case, we also have an input image over here. Let's make this a little bit bigger. And you can see it's the same pose, holding a sword in the armor. It's the same outfit, but different colors, different materials. So this is what ControlNet is for, that you keep parts of the image, for example, the composition in this part, and then change other parts, like for example, the design, the look, the style, things like that. So let's have a look at how ControlNet is actually applied to that process. So let's zoom in here a little bit. Like I said, we're loading an image. We can use any image for that. And then we, in this case, resize the image. Mode resize in here, not rescale, resize, so that I have an image that's going down again to 512 by 768. If you have to crop the image, you might need another node than this one. So in that case, we are just changing that to the right resolution. And then of course we need to pre-process the image so that it actually gives us this kind of map here. Now, not every ControlNet needs to have a pre-processed image, but most do. And after this pre-process has happened, we are going to apply the ControlNet to our image. Now you will see here that this is not applied to the latent input. You can see here we have an input here, 2 yellow dots, positive, negative. That means this is connected to our initial prompt and negative prompt. So this goes in here. And then we of course also have here our ControlNet model that is loaded from the load ControlNet model node. And of course we have our image input. The image is not the original image. Like I said, the image is the pre-processed map in most cases. Now this then goes into your case sampler, again here, positive, negative prompt. Now of course there is some more things to talk about that. For example, you can see here that I have 2 nodes that say apply ControlNet. Now the upper one, as you can see, is a lot easier. It has less inputs. It also has only 1 yellow input. So how does that work? Well, in that case, this is only applied to the positive prompt, not to the negative prompt. And in this case also, we only have a strength on how it is applied, but nothing else to set up here. The rest works exactly the same. Now, when we look at the other node down here, you can see we have some additional things here. So first of all, like I already said, the in and out for the positive and negative prompt. But then in addition to the strength, we also have a start percentage and an end percentage. This means through the render process of your case sampler, let's say it has 20 steps, 30 steps, 40 steps, it is taking a percentage of that and then rendering only these steps. And you can set here up if you want to finish early or if you want to start late. You can also try to do both of that. Now, the most important part of the render process is in the beginning of the image, when the noise is shaped in the shapes of your image that you want to have. And then afterwards, it's becoming refined. So the beginning is actually the most important part. So in that case, the reason why you would use an end percentage that is lower, let's set it, for example, down to 0.345, this would be when you want to have the ControlNet applied to the start of the rendering process, but then you want to have the model take over and apply its own style to that. Now this might lead to a result that is not exactly the same as the original image, but the benefit here is some models are getting too much influence by the ControlNet, so you don't get the actual style, the actual look from that model. And when you reduce this, so it's only applied to the first part of the rendering process, but not to the rest of the rendering process, the model has more freedom to render in its own way. The same basically goes for the strength. And with both of these settings, you can balance out and see what is the best for you to get the nicest results. Now here's another thing that is interesting when we look at our case sampler. You can see that I'm using a denoise of 1. And still, I'm getting an image that looks very similar to my input image. The reason for that, of course, is because we are using ControlNet. But of course, you can also use the image as the input to get something, for example, that has the same style, has the same colors, is closer to the original input image. When you set the denoise to 1, you get a completely new image, but it has the same details in there based on what kind of ControlNet you're applying to that. Now let's have a look at the input and the output side by side. And please don't pay too much attention to the lower detail in the face and overall in the image on the right, because the image on the right side is just 512 by 768, while the image on the left side is upscaled to a very high resolution. So I'm going to click on Q prompt and see what our next image is going to give us. And we have here the next output. You see it looks very different, but also has the same details in there with the house, with the alleyway, even with these towers here and the spiky roofs on that and the other elements here. But there's also a little bit of difference in here. When you look at the armor, you see a little bit of the belly here shining through. And here we have another variation. Again, the details change a little bit in our image, but it is overall very similar. Now let's have a look at what happens when I reduce the end percentage. So again, let's go down here to set it to a low value, 0.312. And we're gonna look over here again. Let's click on Q. And you can see now that the overall composition is the same, but a lot of details have changed in here because this is only roughly preparing the noise at the starting steps of the rendering and then finishing without the ControlNet the rest of the render process, so the other 70% basically. Now this can be very useful when you, for example, want to have variations with more freedom for ideation. With this you can get the same composition, but you can have different variations in here based on what you set up in Apply ControlNet. Of course, there's more to ControlNet than we have just seen because that was the Kenny process. So there's a lot of different other maps here. I selected some of them. There is even more than that. So when we go in here, you can see here, this is the Kenny processor in here. And with this node, the ControlNet preprocessor, I actually have a list of all the different ways that you can create these maps to prepare the image for the process. So here you can see we have the Kenny process, here we have the hat process, which gives us these more blurred lines around that. Now this is interesting because it also gives you more details in here, finer details. So here on the left side, we only have lines, but still leave a lot of freedom to the AI, while here we give a little bit more of the texture and the finer details in our image also to the rendering process. Next we have here Open Pose and DV Pose. Now the difference that you can see here is when we scroll in here, Open Pose is pretty good, but it often still makes some kind of mistakes. While when we look over here, you can see that this has finer details. Let's scroll in even more. Down here, the hands are tracked correctly in this case. So that's pretty important to have these better trackings when you want to use Open Pose. And by the way, very important also here, you can combine multiple ControlNets with each other. But of course, if you use multiple ControlNets, you want to reduce the strength of each ControlNet because otherwise it's just too much information that the AI cannot handle and you will have faulty outputs from your AI image rendering. Here we have another preprocessor that's called Normal Map. There's two different versions. One is called Midas, the other one is called BAE, and you can see there is a difference between them. It looks like the character has been pressed from the backside through a foil and we just see some rudimentary details in here. But you can also see on the left side, it looks a lot more 3D-ish and has a lot more details in there. So for that purpose, what we want to create right now, this might be actually the better choice, but you want to play around with different choices to see what kind of output you're getting. Here we have two other interesting ControlNet preprocessors. One is called segmentation and the other one is scribble. Now what segmentation does is the AI tries to figure out different elements in the image and how they fit together. So you can see that here the character in this case has become red, and then we have here this kind of pink for the sword, and we have some other elements in here, and you can address them individually. As you can see, this is not giving you any details inside of that. It's just outlining or tracking the different objects or areas in your image, and this can actually be converted into a mask later on. And in Scribble, there's different versions of Scribble that you can use. This is actually converting the image into a very crude drawing, and this can be interesting for a lot of different versions where you want to have images that are similar but that at the same time have different style. So this is basically turning it into a rough sketch, so it gives the AI a little bit of an idea what you want to have. Now there's one more thing to say about the preprocessor. Now I already showed you this node here, where you can select all kinds of different maps you want to create for the preprocess of ControlNet. However, you can also see here this doesn't really give you too many different options on to adjust the map. But there are also specialized nodes. So both of them are canny, but in this case, down here for this specialized node, you can see we have a low threshold and we have a high threshold. Now a threshold is basically a limit, and when stuff goes over the limit, it is cut off. So that means here you can decide how many details do you want to have in the image. That can often help you, for example, to cancel out details you don't want to have in there, but also to give you more or less details, so to get a better result with your AI rendering. So let's have a quick look on what these settings do. So for example, for the low threshold, let's set this to 0 and then click here on Q prompt. And you can see that this is changing the image and we have a lot more details in here. Now, if I have the high threshold also on 0, this is basically giving me a ton of detail in here. So it's going to look like this, and you can imagine that this is not very useful because it's just too much information that the AI can't really decipher anymore. So you want to balance this out a little bit and see what is most useful for you. For example, we can set this to 150 and then go here with 50, and let's see what we get then. And you can see that we have more details than here on the left side that is created with the other canny processor that does not have these kind of settings. So this can actually be very useful, but at the same time, of course, you have to have this specialized node, you have to adjust the settings. So if you just want to play around with different methods on how to use these nodes, this node is actually pretty good to get started because here you can just switch with one click. But of course, you also always need to keep in mind when you change the preprocessor, let's change this for example to head, you also need to change the ControlNet model. So here we also change this to head because the map that is created has to fit the applied ControlNet process that we are using. Thanks for watching and see you soon. Bye. Oh, you're still here. So this is the end screen. There's other stuff you can watch like this or that. It's really cool. And yeah, I hope I see you soon. Leave a like if you haven't yet. And well, yeah,